Katia, and myself and my colleague Alexia, we will be providing Spanish interpretation today. Hola a todos, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Katia y yo y mi compañera Alexia vamos a proveer la interpretación al español esta tarde. Alexia and I, we're part of a LA-based collective called Antena Los Angeles, and we are dedicated to promoting language justice in LA and Southern California. Alexia y yo formamos parte de una colectiva de justicia y lenguaje llamada Antena Los Ángeles y promovemos la justicia y lenguaje en Los Ángeles y el sur de California. So you may be asking yourself, what is language justice? And language justice includes the idea that all of us have the right to understand, be understood, and communicate in the language in which you feel most comfortable. Algunos de ustedes se van a preguntar qué es la justicia del lenguaje, y la justicia del lenguaje incluye la idea que todos tenemos el derecho de entender, ser entendidas y comunicar en el idioma en el que nos sentimos más cómodos. So we believe that language justice is the responsibility of everyone, and therefore we have a few ways in which you can support us during this meeting. Creemos que la justicia del lenguaje es la responsabilidad de todos y por lo tanto tenemos algunas maneras de las que nos pueden apoyar durante esta junta. In general, we ask you to speak at a moderate pace. However, if you see us with a panicked face doing this, then that would mean that you need to speak a little slower, please, so we can interpret. Les pedimos que hablen despacio para que podamos interpretar. De todas formas, si nos ven con una cara de pánico haciendo esto, significa que la persona que está hablando necesita hablar más despacio para que podamos interpretar. Sometimes it may also be hard for us to hear or to understand, in which case you will see us do this, which means that whoever is speaking needs to maybe speak a little louder or move their mic, or there may be some other hearing issue. También a veces hay problemas, a veces nos hace difícil escuchar, puede ser un problema de micrófono, puede ser algo de interferencia, estática. Entonces, cuando nos ven a hacer esto, significa que o tienen que hablar más fuerte o a sacar el micrófono más. Today in this space, we all have the capacity to facilitate this meeting in English, Spanish, and ASL. But as part of our language justice commitment, we would also like to honor and acknowledge the other languages that may be present in this space, but also languages are and have been present on this land, including before colonization. Hoy tenemos la capacidad de facilitar esta junta en 3 idiomas, inglés, español y ASL. Pero también como parte de nuestro compromiso con la justicia del lenguaje, es importante reconocer otros idiomas que a lo mejor están presentes en este espacio y que también están y siempre han sido presentes en esta tierra, e incluso antes, mucho antes de la colonización. And finally, for those of you who are listening in Spanish, and I am about to put the information for the interpretation line in the chat box, you will notice that instead of using the endings A and O at the end of adjectives and nouns, we use the E ending, which is not a mistake, but it's a conscious effort to break the gender binary and make the Spanish language more inclusive. Finalmente, para las personas que nos están escuchando en español, y acabo de meter la información de cómo acceder a la línea de interpretación a la cajilla del chat, se van a dar cuenta que en vez de usar las terminaciones A y O, usamos la terminación E. Este no es un error de pronunciación, sino es un esfuerzo consciente de romper el binario de género y crear un espacio más inclusivo. That's all from our end. Thank you so much for having us, and we are still so honored to be able to support this space. Esto es todo de nosotros. Muchas gracias por tenernos y nos sentimos muy honrados de poder apoyar este espacio. Gracias.
Hi, y'all. My name's Ash. I'm the policy coordinator at Transgender Law Center. I just wanted to say hello to everyone virtually. So today we're going to have a little conversation between myself and two of my comrades, Kayla Gore and Milo Inglehart, and as well as our interpreters. So thanks for joining us here. Today's titled virtual gathering is Protect Trans Health, Our Bodies Are Right. And so we'll get into that a little bit more. But I appreciate you all for following us on social media and being a part of this conversation and our website as well. And please continue to follow those to get more information. We're doing these virtual gatherings every week on Thursdays. And so we know a lot's happening right now, particularly for transgender, nonconforming, non-binary, and all of our intersex family in this moment of COVID-19. And so we're sending love to everyone right now. But before we get into the topic today around Protect Trans Health, I just wanted to name as well that disability justice holds access as a necessary practice for disrupting isolation and ensuring the participation and leadership of disabled folks. So access is meaningful when it includes a commitment to the radical, deeply transformative demands of disability justice. And disability justice charges us to identify, interrupt, and disrupt all forms of supremacy, including ableism, anti-Black racism, misogyny, fat phobia, classism, and so much more. So by committing to building accessible spaces, we are following through with a commitment to have critical conversations together. And so again, today, our conversation is going to be around trans health. And so I'm going to chat with the two folks I mentioned, Kayla and Milo, and I'll give you a little bios on them. And we're going to chat both about sort of the state of trans affirming healthcare broadly, but more specifically about Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. And as we're learning at Transgender Law Center at TLC, the final rule of Section 1557 hasn't come out yet. It may not come out until July. But since we're learning that the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, has sent like a proposed rewrite to Section 1557, we wanted to share some information with you all. So we wanted to just provide provide broadly just sort of what Section 1557 is, and just sort of like folks' experiences, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and maybe some examples of what folks are doing around access to healthcare. And so, yeah, I'm going to move into it. I'm going to introduce my comrades, my colleagues, and they can also introduce themselves when they speak as well. But first is Kayla. Kayla Gore uses she, her pronouns. She's the Southern Regional Organizer for TLC at Song. Her organizing work has included fighting for housing equity for all folks who are experiencing chronic homelessness. She's worked for years for the rights of trans folks in particular in the South. And she also supports My Sister's House, which is a local house for trans and gender nonconforming adults in Memphis who've recently been released from incarceration or experienced homelessness. So that's Kayla. And then also we have Milo, who is on our legal team at TLC. Milo Inglehart. Milo uses he and him pronouns. He's a Redstone Fellow at TLC, working with a legal team to improve access to healthcare for trans and gender nonconforming people through a mix of direct legal services and litigation support. So Milo's based in New York. He dreams of a world where holistic, affirming health services are accessible to everyone. So those are the two folks we're going to be hearing a bit from. And so I just wanted to pose a few questions to those folks, to my colleagues, and then we're going to take some questions from you all, and then at the end, just invite you again back to these conversations that we have every Thursday. And so my first question for whoever wants to take this one is just, if you can explain what Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act is, and that can include like how does the rule work. If either of you want to take that, I'm going to give a little bit of a nod to Milo on this one, but if either of you want to take that.
Yeah, I can definitely take that. And thank you for the wonderful introduction, Ash. So just to sort of start at the very beginning, the Affordable Care Act is the 2010 law that was a healthcare reform law that aimed at expanding access to healthcare and health insurance in the United States. And as part of that, it had a provision of the law focused on preventing discrimination, and that's 1557. 1557 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, sex, national origin, disability, and age. And so there was this law, which is still the law and can only be changed by Congress. But part of the Affordable Care Act said that the Department of Health and Human Services can create regulations that interpret the law so that it can enforce those anti-discrimination provisions and all other parts of the law. So under the Obama administration, the Department of Health and Human Services created an interpretation that clarified that discrimination on the basis of sex includes trans people and includes discrimination based on like reproductive health. And the Obama interpretation also included like clarifications that like language access should be part of what's covered by those anti-discrimination provisions. And disability is also part of that and sort of clarified it in broader ways. And so now the Trump administration wants to issue their own interpretation, and that's kind of where we are today, waiting for them to narrow that, to change their interpretation so that it'll limit what and who would be protected by the law. Does that sort of answer the basic background, Ash?
Yeah, that's super helpful. I'm curious, Kayla, if you have anything to add on that too. And I have a particular question, if maybe you can take the lead on the next one. Thanks for the framing, Milo. Just sort of like what's at stake. Yeah, so if and when we get this sort of rewrite, which again hasn't happened yet, but could happen between now and what we're hearing likely between now and like July, just sort of like what's at stake. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some experiences, too, if you feel comfortable that either you've had or you've heard that folks have experienced when trying to access affirming healthcare and experiences of maybe discrimination there?
Yes, thank you, Ash and Milo, for Milo, especially for kind of like breaking that down for folks who are kind of like not super clear on what that means. And to your question, Ash, about the experiences, like the very unique experiences of Southerners when trying to access healthcare, and then taking into consideration people who identify as transgender trying to access healthcare, especially in the rural South. A lot of people are traveling anywhere from 30 to 50 miles at the least to access an emergency room. And that's something that should be readily available to anybody. But to think of this rule being taken back and us not being able to be protected if we drive 30 miles to an emergency room for an emergency situation, more specifically like something that's COVID related, that's like in this political moment, and being denied those services. And I think that that's happening so much, but we just don't hear about those isolated incidences that are happening. That's why it's very important for organizations like the Transgender Law Center on a national level to bring attention to the fact that these are things that people in the South are experiencing daily, even with the protection in place, where people can actually file a complaint against the agency who decides that they're going to refuse services. And like I said, it happens a lot, which causes people to have to drive over 30, maybe 100 miles to access any particular type of healthcare service. because their local area, they're in such a rural area where their privacy isn't protected. If they come to a certain agency, all of their business will be out in the community. So they're forced to not access things that are local, and they're traveling far distances only to possibly be denied that service simply because of how they identify or how they present when they arrive at this facility. It's like, if that answers your question.
Yeah, completely answers the question. I appreciate that. And just to reiterate also your point, and obviously we all know we're in this moment of like COVID-19. So obviously this will have potentially have really devastating impact, and especially in this moment will have even more devastating impact as folks could be going to seek all types of care and be denied. Trans folks could be denied when what we need to be doing is sort of, continuing to make sure that all people can receive the care that they need and care that is affirming and not discriminatory. So I appreciate you obviously bringing that into as well, Kayla. I wanted to also just ask maybe Milo to what you raised also too about language access and the other points, if you had any more to say there too, because it, so not just trans affirming care, but also the expansiveness that you brought in, if you had some other points on that.
Yeah, thank you, Ash. And I really appreciate you raising that because I think it's so important to think about the ways in which this isn't just something that affects trans people or something that affects people who might need access to an abortion or other reproductive care. Because there also is the way that we're seeing what the rule that's going to be released is probably coming down to be. It's going to really limit the rights that people have to get interpretation, to get translation of materials, which is going to further limit access to healthcare for another really vulnerable population. And for people maybe who are trans and English isn't their primary language, that's going to really sort of hammer down on this doubly vulnerable group. And I really appreciate what you both said about how sort of extra cruel and heinous it is that this change in the law might be, or not change in the law, I should be very clear, the law hasn't changed, but this change in the interpretation of the law is coming down potentially during a pandemic where we're already seeing the ways in which people of color, immigrants, all kinds of people are really facing the brunt of the harm of COVID.
Yeah, thank you for that. And also thank you for just a note. I want to repeat to folks, right? Like, this doesn't change the law, but it may encourage providers to discriminate anyway, which is important to note again. So I'm curious also about maybe what folks are doing locally, especially where you are, Kayla, in the South, what folks are doing. Maybe what TLC is doing, if you all have comments on that.
Yeah, Ash. So some local planning that we're doing here in Memphis is trying to get to the point where we can get our commission, our county commission, to actually change the policies within our local health department and our county-funded hospital, which serves as like our trauma center here, and it's like a world-renowned trauma center that they have a lot of different services that people can get who don't have access to insurance or are underinsured or are trans. People go there particularly, so we're trying to get them to change their policies around how they identify people when it comes to gender and sex, and how they respect people's gender and sex, because we know that if you're ailing from something and you go to the emergency room and people are constantly misgendering you or they're dead naming you, even if you've had your name legally changed or your gender marker legally changed, they're still referring back to older records that they've had on you. that can be very triggering to some folks, and that will cause people to not seek treatment or not go to a place because it's the only place that's free and that will actually accept you, or who should affirm you in your transition, but they're actually not, because there isn't an internal policy. So we're trying to work to get the internal policy changed at the local health department in our county-funded trauma center.
Good. That's good to hear. I also want to encourage folks to send us questions as well. Milo, just same thing for you. Just sort of like, what can folks do? And any thoughts you have around that?
Definitely. Yeah, I think the kind of local advocacy that Kayla was talking about is so important right now, because even if you have federal protections that are less certain, you can have state and local protections that can still provide you with those anti-discrimination laws to fall back on, those policies that will protect trans people. And so seeing that like local organizing work is really, really important right now. Just on TLC and like the legal and policy work that we've been doing, we've been preparing for this rule for a while now. I don't know if some of you will remember the Protecting Trans Healthcare portal. It was a website that was set up by TLC and some coalition partners, and it collected comments on this law, and they proposed the changes that they wanted to make and then asked for comments from the public, and a whole bunch of people submitted comments, which is really great because if we bring litigation to challenge this, we can point at all the comments, we can point at all the really good reasons people gave for why this is a terrible change, and we'll say, you ignored all of this, you really should have known. So that was super helpful for building that case against it. And sort of on that, we're looking into bringing a challenge, into bringing litigation that will challenge this new interpretation of the law and hopefully stop it from going into effect. And that's in collaboration with different organizations, different partners, and with like all of the local organizers who hopefully be working with us to bring the best challenge that we can. Yeah, so that's sort of what we're doing on the like litigation and policy side of things.
Thanks so much, y'all, for explaining that. Yeah. Again, just for folks who are listening in, just encourage y'all again to send in any questions in the chat if you have questions for us. But if not, you know, that's okay too. We're always around to answer stuff. You can always do that later, and we can send back answers as we get them. I wanted to see if you all had any maybe either closing thoughts or if you had questions for each other as well, things that might have stuck out that you might want each other to elaborate on too. I'm going to start with you, Kayla. Any sort of never last words, but anything that's on your mind right now?
Yes, of course there are things on my mind. So one particular thing is the complaint process for folks, because like you said, Ash, this is not a thing now, but this is a big possibility. And amidst COVID-19, it's ridiculous that this is actually a thing that we're talking about, seeming that everything else in the world has completely stopped, but attacks on transgender people. I wanted to talk about, like, Milo, to maybe explain more about the complaint process, like filing an actual complaint with HHS. How does that work? If you can give us like a play-by-play or a big synopsis of like what that would look like for folks.
Yes, sorry about the delay. My Zoom stopped for a minute. So you can submit complaints if you suspect discrimination on the HHS website. That is the Department of Health and Human Services website. And if you just search it online, then you can go through. It's really helpful if you can be as specific as possible in these complaints. So like saving any documents you might have from the discriminatory provider, giving specifics about sort of who and where and when. I also want to flag that for people who do live in areas that have their own independent anti-discrimination laws, you can file sometimes with a state or local Department of Human Rights, or they have different names, but it's kind of all, whoever enforces the anti-discrimination laws in the state or local entity. And usually it's sort of a similar process where you'll want as much specific information as you can gather. And then if they go through, the administration or agency goes through and reviews the complaint and doesn't find that they think there was discrimination, there's also still chances that you can sue or other things, but those are much more difficult and require lawyers. So that's the basic process. TLC is also working on a resource that sort of gives more information about this process and has sort of lists of places you can go to find this information. So look out for that on our website.
Thank you all, and thank you, Kayla, for posing that question too. So again, as we have been mentioning, right, the rewrite of the proposed rule hasn't come out yet, but let's say that if and when it does, a question is just sort of what can folks do when it's announced? What should we be doing? And that just, for either one of you, if you have thoughts, comments on that point.
I can say a little about that. Just to sort of reiterate from before, I think like state and local organizing will be really, really important, just because, it's not all on the federal government. So doing that kind of work with local elected officials, with hospitals, all kinds of entities, that'll be really important. And also, Ash has sort of emphasized this already, but the law is still the law. So there have been a bunch of court cases that say discrimination on the basis of sex, that includes trans people. So even if the Trump administration interprets this rule and says discrimination on the basis of sex doesn't include trans people, that doesn't reverse all of the court rulings. So I think, and as Ash said before, and Kayla said, it is likely that it will sort of confuse people or encourage discrimination. But I just want folks to know that under the law, they can still make an argument that this discrimination is prohibited. So knowing your rights can be useful if you're sort of advocating for yourself or looking to sue or pursue other legal action. So that will still be an avenue, even if or when this really bad law comes down. And I'd love to hear what Kayla thinks.
Thank you, Milo. So in addition to those things that Milo mentioned, I would say just like community mapping is a great tool that organizers can use locally to map out places that are safe and that are affirming, that we know are tried and true and will not discriminate against us regardless of what happens with 1557. Because I think that's super important, and that's how a lot of my regional organizing kind of developed, was going to different places and partnering with different organizations and groups and building out resource lists for trans folk to be able to access affirming things, not just healthcare, but all kinds of things, kind of like a yellow book, if you will. But being able to point people in the right directions if they are in an emergency situation where they need access to healthcare, they can actually know that they're going to a place that is affirming, especially if they're in a rural area and they're traveling to a major city, maybe 50 plus miles away. It's better knowing where you can go. And there are plenty of resources that you can just Google, like Milo said, as far as like the complaint process. If you Google 1557, just those four numbers, the first thing that pops up is the HHS website. And it'll take you right down to where you can actually file those complaints. But that will be my number one strategy, in addition to advocacy work around campaigns, trying to get local power to actually make local changes or put protections in place that supersede what's happening on the federal level. It's community mapping. I think that's like something that's easily done, and it doesn't cost a lot of resources. And we know that for trans organizing, we have a very small amount when it comes to funds to do anything when it comes to protecting our community. So community mapping is like one of the easiest, most cost-efficient ways to protect folks in situations like this.
That's super helpful. Thank you for that, Kayla. And we had a question that came in as you're also talking about sort of like the importance of the local level and advocacy on that level. The question is also, so how have you witnessed Black trans folks in the South in particular supporting one another and sharing wisdom when they've been shut out of healthcare institutions? So I know we're talking obviously about Section 1557 and always bringing in the analysis and perspective that like a lot of our folks, particularly Black trans folks in the South that you mentioned, have been historically pushed out and sort of not welcome and not having equitable access to healthcare institutions, period, let alone sort of like affirming trans healthcare, right? So just the question is about just ways you witness Black trans folks in the South supporting one another. And that can look, in all the beautiful ways. But if you have comments and reflections on that, Kayla.
Oh, wow. I'm going to give you the raw truth of the matter. And that's people are being who they are, and they're being resourceful. Black trans folks, brown trans folks, people of color, like we're being resourceful. We're doing what we've always done, and that's take care of each other. And that could look a number of ways, like you said, a number of beautiful ways. And that sharing medication, that's, having treatments done on the Black market, which are very, very dangerous things. Like administering your own hormone replacement therapy is very dangerous. Trying to bandage a wound from being assaulted versus going to the emergency room is very, very dangerous. And something minor becomes something super major because you don't have that access. But we've been resourceful in making sure that we have what we need, trying home remedies and things like that don't necessarily serve us. But these hospitals and these places where they're saying that they're going to protect our health, they're not actually upholding to that. So we're having to resort to doing things that might cause us more harm than good, because we can't access insurance, because we don't have employment, because we don't have access to employment either. So it's a lot of things coming together that makes us do things that we really necessarily wouldn't do, and that the average American wouldn't have to endure or even have a thought process to even think to do things that we're doing to keep ourselves safe and to remedy things that we just can't control, which is people discriminating and living in their truth of of being discriminatory toward people who are different from them.
Thank you so much for that, Kayla. Yes, our people are very resilient, resourceful, communal people. Even if, we shouldn't have to be, we should have access to the things that we need and we want. So I just want to, again, encourage folks to send any questions that you might have in, and this will not be the last time that you can do that. Like I said, we have virtual gatherings every week, and they are on Thursdays. So look out for those on all of our social media platforms, also on our website. And, leave comments in if you have questions that might come up. Folks will try to answer those. But yeah, I just want to give a little moment for some more questions. And then if we don't have those questions, I just want to say thank you to my colleagues here. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us virtually. Like I said, thank you so much, Kayla, Milo, and to all of our interpreters. We really, really appreciate it. And we appreciate you all, being a part of these gatherings. Again, send your questions in, send feedback in. That would also be helpful for us, again, every week on Thursdays. But we appreciate you all, and, we really hope that folks are feeling supported right now, especially in the moment that we're in. I know that can be hard, but we are here. We want to continue to try to get out information to our folks as best we can. And so the virtual gatherings have been just one way that we've been trying to do that. So we appreciate you all.
Thank you for great facilitation, Ash.